Hello and welcome to Nightly History. Tonight, we will journey far across oceans and mountains to a quiet valley on the western edge of South America. Imagine yourself standing in the early morning light of Peru. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of salt from the distant sea. Around you stretch dry hills of sand and stone, shaped by wind and time. A narrow river cuts through the valley, the Supe, glimmering like a silver thread in the dawn. As you walk along its banks, you begin to see shapes rising from the earth. Wide platforms, stairways carved from stone, and great circular plazas sunk deep into the ground. They are not ruins of the Inca, nor the Maya, nor any empire you have heard of. They are far older. This place is Caral, a city that was already ancient when Egypt was young. 5,000 years ago, people built temples here without iron, without wheels, without war. They planted cotton, fished the Pacific, and gathered to play music on bone flutes beneath the open sky. No kings are remembered, no battles recorded, and yet the stones speak. They tell of a civilization that flourished in peace, that found order in the rhythm of wind and water. And then, when the river changed and the rains grew uncertain, fell silent beneath the sand. For millennia, Caral slept, forgotten by the world it had once inspired. Tonight, as the desert wind settles and the stars drift over the Andes, we will return to that silence. We will trace the rise and fall of the first city of the Americas to see how it was born, how it vanished, and what remains of its quiet wisdom. So, take a deep breath. Let the noise of your day fade away. Let the wind of the Supe Valley carry you back to the beginning of time itself. There are valleys that remember everything, even when the rivers change their course and the winds reshape the dunes. They hold the memory of what once lived within them. The Supe Valley, on the coast of Peru, is one such place. A quiet corridor between ocean and desert, where the first echoes of civilization in the Americas began to stir. Imagine standing there at dawn. The horizon is pale gold, mist from the Pacific drifts inland, dissolving into the dry hills that rise like sleeping beasts above the river. There are no trees here, only scattered shrubs clinging to the dust. The earth smells faintly of salt and clay. Somewhere far off you can hear the cry of seabirds returning to the coast after a night of fishing. For a long time, this valley seemed empty. To modern eyes, it still does. But beneath its surface, beneath layers of sand and forgotten centuries, lies a different story. Long before there were cities in the Andes or empires in the jungle, long before bronze or written words reached these shores, people came here to build. They came with nothing more than stone, reed, and fire. And somehow, that was enough. The river Supe begins in the highlands and threads its way to the sea, cutting through 40 kilometers of arid land. It is narrow, almost modest, yet in a desert like this, even a small river can sustain life. It fed the earliest farmers, men and women who learned to guide the flow of water into their fields with simple canals, who coaxed green life out of the dust. They grew cotton, beans, squash and guava. They fished the Pacific for anchovies and gathered shellfish along the shore. Their world was both harsh and generous. Rain rarely fell, but the ocean currents were rich and the land offered clay, reed and stone. At first, these communities were small, villages of woven huts and storage pits near the riverbanks. But as generations passed, the people began to look toward the higher ground. On the terraces above the floodplain, they saw safety from rising water. And perhaps something more. They saw a place where earth and sky met, where fires could burn without fear of the tide, where voices could carry across the valley. So they began to build on the hills. Not houses, but platforms, Not walls, but mounds that reached upward. No one knows the names of those first builders. They left no inscriptions, no kings carved in stone. Yet, from their hands emerged one of the oldest cities on earth. They shaped the land into geometry, rectangles, circles, stairways, as if translating the rhythm of the world into form. They did not copy nature, they conversed with it. The wind that whistled across the plateau, the river that shimmered below, all became part of their design. Archaeologists, who first walked this valley in the 1990s, found themselves surrounded by silence. There were no statues, no armies, no signs of violence, only vast mounds of stone, half swallowed by sand. When they began to dig, the pattern revealed itself. 6 great pyramids, each aligned with the sun, and between them, a sunken circular plaza, a gathering place where thousands might have stood to watch firelight dance upon the walls. It was a city older than Athens, older than Rome, older even than the stories humanity tells of its beginnings. Imagine then what this valley once looked like, 5,000 years ago. The air would have been alive with the sounds of labour, stone scraping stone, footsteps shuffling along paths, voices calling in rhythm as baskets of earth were carried and poured. There were no beasts of burden, no metal tools. Every block was lifted by human strength and patience, and yet somehow these people built monuments that would endure millennia. At dusk, smoke would rise from hearths along the terraces. Families gathered around reed fires, spinning cotton into thread, weaving nets for the next day's fishing. Children laughed in the fading light. Elders spoke of the river's moods, of the moon's pull on the tides. And beyond the hum of daily life, the pyramids stood in stillness, their stairways glowing with the last amber of sunset. To them, perhaps, these structures were not temples or tombs, but living things, places where earth met the divine. The people of Caral knew the desert could take everything, so they learned to listen. They read the clouds, the scent of the wind, the murmur of the river at night. Their survival depended not on conquering the landscape, but on understanding its silences. They built their city in harmony with what surrounded them, a balance between dryness and water, light and shade, life and death. If you stood there now, you might still feel it. The hush that settles after the wind passes, the faint echo of drums long gone. The valley holds its breath, as if the past is only sleeping beneath the sand. Archaeologists later discovered instruments made from pelican bones, flutes that could still produce sound after 5,000 years. When played, their tone is thin and haunting, like the cry of the sea carried inland. Perhaps those melodies once echoed between the pyramids during ceremonies, when fires burned in the circular plaza and shadows danced across the walls. Music, not war, was the language of Caral. It bound the community, marking time as surely as the rivers flow. There is something almost impossible about imagining peace that old. We are used to histories written in conquest, in blood and empire, but Caral tells another story, one of cooperation, of trade, of shared purpose. From the ocean came shells and fish, from the mountains, stone and fruit. The people of Caral sat at the crossroads of worlds, between highlands and coast, between water and fire. They did not dominate these worlds, they connected them. The night sky above the valley would have been unbroken. No city lights, only stars so bright they cast faint shadows on the ground. You can imagine the builders pausing in their work, looking up to measure the heavens. Some scholars believe the pyramids were aligned to celestial events, to the solstices and the path of the sun. If so, Caral was not only the birthplace of architecture, but also of astronomy in the New World. Its people sought harmony between earth and sky, between the predictable motion of stars and the fragile rhythm of human life. Even now, the layout of the city feels deliberate, almost poetic. The circular plaza lies like a heartbeat at its centre, surrounded by temples and terraces that seem to breathe with the landscape. From above, Caral resembles a spiral unfurling into the desert, as if the city itself were meditating. Everything here speaks of rhythm, the rise of platforms, the fall of steps, the way light slides across the stone as the day turns to night. Yet for all its grandeur, Caral was not built to impress invaders or glorify rulers. It was built for belonging. The community here existed without kings or armies. Authority flowed through ritual, music, and the unspoken understanding that survival was a shared act. When they gathered in the plaza, it was not to march but to celebrate the river, the wind, and the balance that allowed them to live. To walk through the ruins today is to feel both awe and calm. The sand softens every edge, the wind hums through corridors that once echoed with life. Each stone, warmed by the sun, seems to hold a pulse of its own, a slow, enduring rhythm that transcends language. The archaeologist Ruth Shady once said that Caral taught the world that civilization can be born without war. Here, power did not mean conquest, but cohesion. It meant knowing when to plant, when to fish, when to listen to the silence between two gusts of wind. It meant building not for one lifetime, but for generations that would never know your name. And that is perhaps the most haunting thing about the Soup Valley. For thousands of years after Caral was abandoned, no one returned to build again on these hills. It was as if the valley itself had spoken once, and then chosen to remain quiet. Tonight, as you listen, imagine that stillness. The same river still flows, the same wind still crosses the plain. The ruins rise gently from the earth, like thoughts half remembered. Somewhere, deep in the sand, the music of bone flutes sleeps, waiting for breath. The valley of silence endures, not because it has nothing left to say, but because its story has already been told, and now it simply listens. When the people of the Supo Valley first looked upon the terraces above their river, they did not yet know they were about to change the course of human history. They had no kings to command them, no armies to organise them, no written plan etched upon clay. And yet somewhere in their collective heart, a single idea began to take shape. That permanence could exist in a world of wind and sand. Imagine the first hands pressing stones into the earth. The sun is high, the air shimmering with heat. Children carry baskets of small rocks from the riverbank. Elders trace lines in the dust with reeds, marking where the platforms will rise. No one gives orders, but everyone understands. The rhythm of work feels like music, the sound of stones meeting soil, the rustle of woven bags, the soft hum of voices carried by the wind. These people were not strangers to building. They had long known how to raise small terraces for crops, how to reinforce their homes with reed mats and mud. But this was different. The pyramids of Caral would reach toward the sky, as if to remind the earth that humans too could create mountains. They began by levelling the ground, cutting away the roughness of the hill to make way for their designs. The first pyramid rose near the heart of the settlement, broad at its base, climbing in slow, deliberate steps. Every layer was filled with stones, wrapped in woven bags, each one placed carefully to prevent collapse. The technique was simple, but ingenious. The bags absorbed the pressure of time and earthquakes, allowing the structure to breathe with the earth instead of resisting it. As the foundations grew, so did the people's confidence. Other platforms appeared, each slightly different in size and orientation, each aligned to the movement of the sun. From above, the city began to take form, a network of temples, plazas, and dwellings arranged in harmony with the valley's contours. At the centre lay the great sunken circular plaza, its stone walls sloping inward like the walls of a bowl meant to collect the sky. Here, people gathered, not just to worship, but to live. They danced, played music, exchanged goods, and shared stories of the river's moods. When the wind swept through the plaza, it echoed like a voice speaking from the deep. To stand there was to feel part of something vast and invisible, a rhythm older than language. We can only guess how they organised such labour. Perhaps each family, each clan, contributed a share of work during the dry season, when fishing was slow and the fields rested. Perhaps the elders, those who watched the stars, decided when to begin and when to stop. Archaeologists have found no signs of rulers or overseers, only evidence of collaboration. It was a city built not by decree, but by agreement. The materials came from everywhere and nowhere. Stones gathered from the riverbed, reeds cut from the marshes, clay from the floodplain. Even the tools were humble: hammerstones, wooden levers, baskets woven from grasses. Yet the precision of the architecture is astonishing. Walls rise at perfect angles. Staircases climb in symmetrical alignment with the sun's path. In some temples, the corners are oriented almost exactly to the solstices, proof that these builders watched the heavens as closely as the river. As day faded into night, fires would flicker atop the platforms. From afar, the city must have looked like a constellation reflected on earth, points of orange flame mirrored by the stars above. The people of Caral were not content with mere survival. They were building a message that humans could shape the land without destroying it, that stone could hold memory, and that cooperation could endure longer than conquest. When archaeologists uncovered the remains of musical instruments, flutes made from pelican bones, trumpets fashioned from conch shells, they realized that sound had been as essential as stone in the making of this city. Music guided their work, their rituals, perhaps even their daily routines. Each note was a link between body and cosmos. In that sense, the builders of Caral were not only engineers, they were composers. Their city was a symphony, written in earth and light. Consider what it means to build the first city in a world without cities. There were no models to imitate, no neighbouring nations to trade ideas with. Caral's people had to invent everything, not only the architecture, but the very idea of urban life. Roads connecting plazas, public spaces for ceremonies, granaries to feed the population. And somehow, without rulers or war, it worked. Population estimates suggest thousands lived here, sustained by trade that stretched across the coast and into the highlands. Fish from the sea were exchanged for obsidian, fruit and fibres from the mountains. The river became not a border, but a bridge. In the heat of midday, when the valley shimmered, the workers sought shade along the base of the platforms. Children splashed in shallow pools of diverted river water. Women washed cotton threads in clay basins, spreading them out to dry like pale ribbons under the sun. The soundscape was gentle: laughter, the whistle of wind, the creak of woven baskets. If peace has a sound, perhaps it was this. The builders also carried a deep respect for cycles, of day and night, of season and tide. They built not for eternity, but for renewal. Temples were expanded and rebuilt over generations, each layer enclosing the last like a memory preserved within the earth. When a structure aged, it was not demolished, but embraced, covered with new walls, given fresh purpose. In this way, the city grew organically, layer upon layer, like the growth rings of a tree. Standing on those terraces today, you can see how the architecture mirrors the surrounding landscape. The pyramids echo the shapes of the hills beyond them, The plazas reflect the curve of the river. Even the colours, ochre, grey, pale white, blend seamlessly with the desert. It is as if the city was not built on the land, but from it. Some archaeologists believe Caral's builders observed the stars from the tops of their pyramids. Perhaps they used the horizon to predict the solstices or the return of rains from the highlands. For them, the sky was a living calendar, not a mystery to be conquered, but a guide to be followed. At night, when torches flickered and the constellations emerged, the city would hum with a quiet reverence. Children pointed upward to the Milky Way. Elders spoke of spirits that travelled between stars and water. Their universe was circular, not linear, an endless return of light after darkness. And yet, beneath all this grandeur, life remained simple. There were no palaces, no fortresses. The houses were modest, built of reed and mud, clustered near the pyramids, as if seeking their protection. Daily life revolved around the flow of the river and the rhythm of work. In that rhythm, perhaps, lay their strength. The sense that every individual act, carrying a stone, weaving a basket, lighting a fire, contributed to something larger than oneself. To modernise, Caral's achievements defy logic. How could a people without metal tools, wheels, or beasts of burden construct monuments rivaling those of Egypt and Mesopotamia? The answer may lie not in technology, but in intention. They built slowly, carefully, with patience measured not in years but in lifetimes. Their vision was communal, not imperial, and because it was shared, it endured. When you walk through the ruins today, you can still see the outlines of their vision. The central plaza remains circular and precise. The stairways rise evenly, their steps worn but intact. The pyramids, though eroded, still command the horizon like guardians of memory. Even the stones seem to hum with the warmth of countless hands that once touched them. Ruth Shady, who led the modern excavation of Caral, once described the site as the smile of the earth. It is a fitting phrase, for in a world so often defined by conflict, Caral offers a different reflection of humanity, one that smiles back at the land rather than frowning upon it. Perhaps the most remarkable discovery is what isn't there. No fortifications, no weapons, no signs of mass graves or destruction. Instead, archaeologists found musical instruments, ceremonial offerings, and trade goods. A society without war may sound like a dream, but here the dream was real. It lasted for more than 1,000 years, and yet nothing lasts forever. The builders of Caral could not control the forces that sustained them. Over centuries, the climate began to shift. Rains grew unpredictable. The river sometimes flooded, sometimes vanished. Harvests dwindled, and the people faced choices their ancestors had never imagined. But that is a story for another night, another part of this long, quiet history. For now, imagine standing in the plaza. As dusk returns, the last workers descend the stairways, leaving their tools neatly stacked. Fires are lit, casting a golden glow on the walls. From somewhere beyond the pyramid, a flute begins to play, soft, wavering, almost human. The sound rises and falls with the wind, blending with the rustle of reeds, with the breath of the desert. Above, the stars appear one by one, steady and patient, as they have for millennia. The builders rest, the valley listens, and the first city on this side of the world begins to dream. By the time Caral's pyramids reached their full height, the valley no longer felt empty. It pulsed with rhythm, the quiet heartbeat of a people who had learned to live in perfect balance with the desert that surrounded them. From sunrise to dusk, the city breathed in wind and light. At night, it exhaled smoke and song. Wind was the first element that shaped Caral. It came every afternoon from the Pacific, rolling inland with the scent of salt and seaweed. It brushed the stone walls, stirred the reed roofs, and cooled the labourers as they worked upon the terraces. Sometimes the gusts were strong enough to lift grains of sand into the air, creating waves of dust that shimmered like mist. The people did not curse it, they learned from it. They studied how the wind flowed between walls, how it sang through narrow corridors, and they built accordingly. The architecture of Caral was not meant to fight the wind, it was meant to dance with it. Fire came next. At night, after the work was done and the valley had dimmed, the city would come alive again under flame. From the tops of the pyramids, smoke curled upward like slow-moving rivers, carrying the scent of burning algarrobo wood. The great circular plazas glowed with orange light. Families gathered near hearths, and the flutes began to play. Their melodies were simple at first, long drawn-out notes that floated into the open sky, but soon others joined in, weaving sound upon sound, until the valley itself seemed to hum. There are few things left of those nights, except the instruments they played. The flutes were made from the bones of pelicans and condors, polished smooth and carved with small holes for fingers. Some were shaped from llama bones, others from deer. Their pitches varied, high and trembling, or deep and resonant, depending on the size. When archaeologists tested them, the tones that emerged were haunting, airy, fragile, almost human. It is easy to imagine how they once filled the plaza with their sound, echoing against the pyramids, mingling with the rustle of wind and the crackle of fire. In those sounds, there was no hierarchy. Each flute answered another, each rhythm depended on the rest. It was music born of community, not of conquest. For the people of Caral, sound was not just art, it was structure. It gave meaning to the way they moved, built, planted, prayed. The city itself seemed to respond. Corridors funneled echoes, plazas amplified resonance, and stairways turned footsteps into percussion. Caral was an instrument, and its people knew how to play it. If you walked through its plazas 5,000 years ago, you would not have seen chaos. You would have seen grace, fires flickering in ordered lines, shadows rippling across walls as dancers moved in circles around the plaza's heart. Their bodies marked the rhythm of the seasons, planting, harvesting, fishing and returning. At the centre of it all burned the ritual flame, its light mirrored by the stars above. No written texts describe these ceremonies, but the architecture hints at their meaning. Some temples contained shallow pits where offerings of fruit, fish and woven cloth were burned. Others held stairways leading into narrow chambers, perhaps places where music and fire met, where prayers were whispered into smoke. The people may have believed that the flames carried their words upward, turning them into light. And above all, there was wind. Every element in Caral was touched by it. When it rose from the ocean, it moved through the city like a living spirit. You could hear it in the reeds, in the flutes, in the breath of every song. It cooled the fires but never extinguished them. It sculpted the dunes but never erased the footprints. To the people of Caral, the wind was both messenger and memory. It reminded them that nothing built by human hands could last forever, but everything could be carried forward in sound. During the day, the city thrived. Fishermen brought their catch from the coast, trading anchovies and shells for cotton and fruit. Weavers spun the cotton into nets strong enough to hold the sea's weight. Children helped sort fish along the riverbanks, while elders oversaw granaries filled with dried goods. The air smelled of salt, sun and smoke, the scent of a civilization that had learned the art of enough. Each morning began with the light striking the tops of the pyramids. It crept slowly downward, igniting their stone faces with gold. The people rose to its warmth, offering the first meal of the day to the sky. a few kernels of maize, a handful of fruit. There were no temples locked away for priests. Every fire, every field was a sacred space. The divine was not distant. It was present in wind and flame, in the rhythm of life itself. By midday, the wind returned, cooling the heat and carrying whispers through the corridors. Workers balanced baskets of reed and stone. Voices rose in song to keep time. Somewhere on a high platform, a child played a flute, its notes blending with the gusts. There was no distinction between labour and worship. Both were acts of harmony. When the sun dipped low again, the fires were lit once more, and the songs of the day gave way to the songs of the night. In this cycle, wind by day, fire by night, Caral found its heartbeat. It was not a civilization that measured wealth in gold or armies, but in rhythm. Everything moved according to balance. Too much wind would scatter crops, too little would choke the fires. They watched the sky carefully, noting the colour of clouds, the direction of breeze. They knew when to fish, when to plant, when to gather, because they had learned to listen. Archaeologists have found traces of burnt offerings deep inside the temples, charred reeds, seeds, and small fragments of cotton thread. To modern science, these are data points. To the people who left them, they were gifts, the remains of prayers sent into the air. Some offerings included tiny sculptures of human faces made from clay, each one different, as if representing individuals giving themselves to the elements. Others contained seashells, carried inland from the coast, proof that the people of Caral saw no boundary between ocean and desert, only continuation. At night, when the fires burned and music filled the air, light must have danced across the entire valley. From far away, travellers approaching from the coast would have seen the glow of the pyramids long before reaching them, an island of warmth in a sea of darkness. Perhaps they followed the music, drawn by curiosity or faith, and when they arrived, they found not warriors, but hosts offering food, cloth, and stories. Caral was not just a city, it was a gathering point for humanity itself. If there was hierarchy here, it was subtle, based not on domination, but on understanding. The musicians, the weavers, the farmers, the builders, all were part of the same symphony. The priests, if they existed, were conductors, not kings. They guided rituals, read the stars, and reminded the people that balance must be maintained. The real authority lay in the elements, the wind, the river, and the fire that refused to die. Centuries later, when Caral was long abandoned, the valleys still carried their echoes. The wind that passes through the ruins today sounds much like it must have then, low, rhythmic, almost melodic. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the bone flutes answering each other, rising and falling like breath. The fires are gone, but their warmth remains in the colour of the stones, in the faint traces of soot on the walls. Even silence here has texture. It hums softly, like music remembered by the earth. What made Caral endure for so long was not its architecture, but its harmony. Every element was interwoven: wind, fire, music, and human intention. They did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as part of its song. Each pyramid, each plaza, each flame was a note, and together they formed a melody that lasted 1,000 years. Today, the valley stands quiet again. The wind still moves through the plazas. The sun still lights the stairways each morning. No one plays the flutes now, but perhaps the air itself remembers their tone. Every gust seems to carry a whisper, every shadow a rhythm. It is as if the city continues to breathe, slower, softer, but alive. When we look at Caral, we often see ruins, but perhaps we should see resonance instead. the lingering vibration of a civilization that once chose beauty over power. They built not for eternity, but for presence. Their music has faded, but its echo teaches us something profound, that peace leaves a sound too, even if it is only the hush between two notes of history. And so the city of wind, fire, and music still sings, not with instruments or voices, but with time itself. The desert carries its melody across centuries, through silence and sand, reminding us that the first city of the Americas was not a fortress of stone, but a song carved into the breath of the earth. The wind moves differently here. It carries no scent of smoke, no memory of battle. Across the terraces of Caral, the air has always been clean, salt, dust, river, and light. It is as if the land itself remembers that it was once home to a civilization that chose not to fight. In most histories, progress is measured by conflict. We trace the rise of empires through their wars, the spread of cultures through their conquests. But here, in the Valley of Supe, humanity wrote another version of its story, a quiet chapter built on cooperation rather than conquest. Archaeologists have searched these ruins for decades, expecting to find what they know from elsewhere: arrowheads, spear points, broken bones, burn marks. They found none. No fortifications crown the hills, no walls guard the city's edge. The pyramids of Caral were not citadels, they were sanctuaries. The people who built them needed no defense, for they did not see their neighbors as enemies. How do we know this? The evidence is absence itself, the silence in the archaeological record. The layers of soil around the pyramids are free of ashes from destruction. The skeletons unearthed here show no signs of violent death. Even the tools that remain are tools of creation: hammers, baskets, flutes, not weapons. In a world where survival often meant domination, Caral stood apart. Imagine the people of the valley at dusk. No watchtowers, no guards. Children running freely along the terraces, laughter echoing down to the river. The only drums are those of ceremony, the only fires those of celebration. For more than 1,000 years, this peace endured, longer than the lifespan of many kingdoms built on war. Somewhere along the river, a fisherman repairs his nets with cotton thread. Beside him, a trader counts seashells, currency from the coast. Inland, farmers harvest beans and squash beneath the late sun. At the market plaza, goods from distant valleys arrive: obsidian from the mountains, tropical fruit from the jungle, coloured feathers carried carefully in reed baskets. No armies guard these exchanges, no taxes weigh them down. Trust is the currency here, and the river carries it both ways. Trade connected Caral to dozens of smaller settlements scattered along the coast. Each contributed something different: fish, fruit, stone, fibre, and in return received what they lacked. It was not an empire but a network, bound not by fear but by necessity and friendship. The ocean, the mountains, and the desert all met here, and through Caral's people, they learned to speak to one another. To build a civilization without war requires more than luck. It demands a philosophy, a shared belief that harmony is strength. Perhaps the people of Caral understood that violence would destroy what the desert already threatened to take. Their environment was fragile. One failed harvest, one drought, one misplaced fire could end it all. So they built a culture where cooperation was survival itself. The absence of weapons does not mean the absence of power. Power in Caral flowed through ritual, through the invisible chords of respect and reciprocity. It was not shouted, it was sung. Those who guided the people did so through ceremony, by reading the stars, predicting the tides, deciding when to plant and when to fish. Authority was measured not in soldiers but in knowledge. The most powerful person in Caral may have been the one who could hear the wind and know when rain would fall. In the great circular plazas, these guides, priests, astronomers, elders, gathered the people. They spoke not of enemies or borders, but of cycles, the rising of the river, the coming of El Niño, the warm current that could change the seasons, the delicate balance between ocean and desert. Their task was to keep that balance intact, to remind everyone that the land gave life only to those who treated it gently. Archaeologists have found small offerings buried beneath the floors of temples, bundles of reeds tied with cotton string, containing fish bones, seeds, and fragments of flute. They were not sacrifices of life, but gifts of gratitude, a way to return something to the earth after taking from it. This exchange, repeated over generations, became the foundation of their peace. You cannot make war against what you see as sacred. Picture the city at night. The pyramids glow with firelight. The wind hums through the corridors. From a distance, it must have looked like the stars had descended to the valley. Men and women move calmly through the plazas, carrying baskets of food to share. There is no shouting, no command, only the steady rhythm of life, shaped by understanding rather than fear. Caral's people did not live in isolation. They traded with other valleys, Aspero, Banduria, Huaricanga, each a spark of civilization along the Peruvian coast. Sometimes they competed for resources, but even that competition took peaceful form. Instead of raids, there were rituals. Instead of armies, envoys. The greatest display of power was generosity. To give more than you received was to show that you had enough. Perhaps this is why music mattered so deeply. Harmony in sound mirrored harmony in life. When flutes and drums played together, each voice had its place, neither dominating nor yielding, but blending. The same principle guided the city itself. Each household, each trade, each ritual added to the symphony. Disruption was dissonance, and dissonance was to be avoided. We may never know exactly what they believed. Their gods left no names, their prayers no scriptures. But the structures they left behind speak in their stead. The plazas are open, facing the sky, no hidden chambers, no closed sanctuaries. The divine was not enclosed within walls, but shared among all. A civilization without war is also a civilization without secrets. Even the geography of Caral reflects this openness. From the top of the Great Pyramid, one can see the entire valley, the river winding like silver, the dunes beyond, the faint line of the ocean. Nothing is hidden. Every movement, every ritual, every gesture is part of the same vast panorama. Transparency was protection. Visibility replaced defense. It is tempting to imagine that such peace was fragile, that without warriors, they must have been vulnerable. Yet Caral endured for more than a millennium, a span longer than the Roman Republic, longer than the empire of the pharaohs. Its longevity was not in spite of peace, but because of it. Without the cost of constant war, resources flowed into construction, music, trade, and the slow perfection of their way of life. Their legacy lives quietly in the cultures that followed. The Inca, millennia later, would also see the world as a system of reciprocity, a cycle of giving and receiving, known as Aini. Perhaps that idea was born here, in the Valley of Caral, carried forward in stories and traditions that outlived the city itself. Peace, it seems, can echo farther than conquest. Yet, even in paradise there are shadows. The very balance that sustained Caral also made it vulnerable. When the ocean currents shifted and the rains faltered, the network that linked valley and coast began to strain. People had to move. to seek new sources of food. Still, there is no evidence of revolt or collapse through violence. They dispersed as quietly as they had lived, like a melody fading into silence. Today, when you walk among the ruins, the sense of calm is immediate. No matter the heat, the wind carries a coolness. No matter the silence, you feel a pulse. It is the echo of a society that chose cooperation as its cornerstone. The stones may have crumbled, but their pattern endures. Wide plazas open to the sky, stairways without gates, walls without weapons. We often look back on history and ask what we have learned. Caral turns the question around. It asks what we have forgotten. We have inherited the architecture of power, the art of defense, the mythology of war. But in this quiet valley 5,000 years ago, humanity proved that another path was possible. They built cities not to dominate, but to belong. They raised pyramids not for gods of victory, but for the spirit of balance. And they lived long enough for time itself to call them ancient. As the sun sets over the Soup Valley, shadows stretch across the terraces. The wind rises, tracing the old paths between the pyramids. You can almost hear voices in its breath, not of soldiers, but of builders, musicians, and dreamers. They whisper of a truth older than empire, that peace is not weakness, but wisdom. The valley listens, as it always has. It does not need monuments of war to remember its greatness. Its memory is written in harmony, in the spaces between stones, in the music between silences, in the rhythm of a civilization that found strength in stillness. And as night falls, the desert cools, the stars return, bright and watchful. Their light touches the pyramids just as it did thousands of years ago. No banners, no armies, no conquerors remain. Only the wind, the fire, and the quiet endurance of peace. There are moments in every civilization when the rhythm falters, when what once felt eternal begins to shift, quietly, like the tide receding from the shore. In Caral, the change did not come with thunder or invasion. It came with silence. The people of the Super Valley had lived in harmony with their world for centuries. They trusted the river to flood and retreat in its ancient rhythm, to renew the soil each season. They trusted the winds to come from the sea and cool the heat of the desert. They trusted the balance they had built. But the earth is never still, and time has its own designs. At first, the signs were small. The river grew shallower one year. The next, it overflowed its banks. Rains came too soon or too late. The ocean currents shifted, bringing strange weather to the coast. Storms that battered the shore, droughts that parched the fields. The people of Caral watched these changes, with patience at first, believing they were part of the cycle. But the cycle did not return. The winds that once cooled the valley began to burn with heat. Mist from the Pacific grew faint. The fishermen spoke of the sea turning unpredictable. Its waters warmer, its fish swimming deeper. Anchovies, once abundant, became scarce. Without them, trade faltered. Without trade, the flow of goods and trust that had bound the region together began to weaken. Imagine the city in this time of uncertainty. The plazas are still filled with people, but their gatherings are quieter now. Where music once echoed freely, prayers have taken its place. At dusk, fires burn longer, brighter, as if the people believe light could hold back the drought. In the temples, offerings grow more desperate. Fruit shriveled from the fields, fish smaller than before, cotton thread dyed in colours meant to please unseen gods. The elders consult the stars. They see that the constellations no longer mark the seasons as they once did. They sense a pattern shifting beyond their understanding. The wind that used to speak softly now howls through the corridors, scattering ash from the sacred fires. The same breath that once cooled the valley now carries dust and despair. Still, the people do not abandon hope. They repair their canals, dig deeper wells, adjust their planting seasons. They perform ceremonies to call back the rains. For generations, these efforts work. Small recoveries, brief returns of abundance, but each success grows shorter, and each failure cuts deeper. The valley is tired. The river, once the lifeline of their civilization, becomes a mirror of uncertainty, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel. Archaeologists who sift through Caral's soil today can read the story in layers of sediment. They find traces of floods followed by droughts, evidence of shifting sands, cracked clay where fields once thrived. To them, these are patterns of climate. To the people who lived through it, they were omens. Nature, once a trusted ally, had begun to turn away. In times like these, a society reveals its soul. Some turn to war, to conquest, to taking from others what the land no longer provides. Caral did not. Instead, they turned inward, to ritual, to reflection, to prayer. They sought to heal the imbalance not by force, but by understanding. Perhaps that was their greatest strength, and their quiet undoing. The music that once filled the night began to change. The songs grew slower, lower, as if the flutes themselves carried grief. The great plazas that once overflowed with dancers now echoed with the chants of priests calling to the sky. Fire, once a symbol of warmth, became a plea, its smoke rising in thin lines toward an indifferent heaven. In one of the smaller temples, archaeologists discovered an offering sealed inside a stone chamber. It contained fragments of cloth dyed red, bundles of reeds, and the skeleton of a child, carefully wrapped, not sacrificed in violence, but given to the gods as a messenger. It speaks of desperation, the moment when faith becomes the last refuge of a people who have done everything right, yet face a world that no longer listens. The fields along the river turned pale. The cotton that once grew thick and white now wilted in the heat. The fish that sustained them vanished from the nets. Families began to leave, carrying what they could. Woven baskets, musical instruments, small idols carved from stone. They followed the river upstream, searching for water, for new ground, for continuity. The city that had once been the beating heart of peace began to thin, like breath at the end of a song. But it did not die all at once. For decades, perhaps centuries, Caral lingered. Some terraces stayed occupied. Fires still burned in a few temples. Children were still born, still learned the songs of their ancestors. Yet each generation saw less than the one before. The plazas grew emptier, the markets quieter, the music fainter. Like the tide withdrawing from the shore, life receded gently but steadily. It is easy to imagine the last festival held here, the valley bathed in gold as the sun set behind the dunes. Fires lit across the pyramids, one final time. The bone flutes sang, perhaps for days, perhaps for the last time. The people gathered, danced and prayed, knowing that what they were honouring was not just the gods, but the memory of their own endurance. Then the fires burned low, and the valley went dark. Even in decline, Caral held its dignity. No invaders destroyed it. No battle marked its fall. It was not taken, it was released. The desert simply reclaimed what had always belonged to it. Wind filled the empty plazas, smoothing away footprints. Sand gathered in stairways, covering the stones like a shroud. And slowly, the city that had lived for 1,000 years was folded back into the earth. To the modern mind, collapse often sounds like failure. But Caral's ending feels different. It is more like a sigh, an acceptance that all things, even peace, must yield to change. In its silence, there is no tragedy, only transition. The people left behind what they had built, and the land began its long work of forgetting. When Ruth, Shady and her team unearthed Caral thousands of years later, they found not ruins of conquest but layers of calm. The walls had fallen inward, not outward. The fires had died gently. The final layers of occupation showed signs of careful abandonment, structures filled with sand to protect them, as if the last inhabitants knew they were leaving something sacred behind. The signs of change were everywhere, yet even in their leaving, the people of Caral showed grace. No tombs of kings, no fortresses, no graffiti of despair, just silence, order, and the lingering scent of clay. Standing in the valley today, you can still feel that silence. The air moves slowly, heavy with memory. When the sun drops behind the hills, the shadows of the pyramids stretch long across the ground, pointing toward the river that once sustained them. The wind that once carried songs now carries dust. And yet if you listen closely, beneath that wind, there is still a hum, a faint vibration, like a breath drawn by the earth itself. Maybe that is the sound of what remains when a civilization ends without violence, not ruin but reverence, not ashes but balance restored. Caral did not vanish, it transformed. It passed from hands to sand, from voices to echoes, from life to legend. In the quiet of the desert, endings and beginnings are the same. Every grain of sand was once part of something greater. Every gust of wind carries what was into what will be. The people of Caral may have left their valley, but their way of life, peaceful, cooperative, in harmony with the land, did not vanish. It lingered, carried in stories, in genes, in the faint memory of how to listen to the wind. When the moon rises over the ruins now, its light touches the stones with silver. No voices answer, but the silence feels alive. Perhaps the city is still waiting, not for resurrection, but for remembrance. For someone to stand in its plaza, close their eyes, and breathe in the same air that once sustained the first civilization of the Americas. The signs of change, in the end, were not warnings of destruction. They were the desert's way of reminding humanity that permanence is an illusion, and that the greatest achievement of Caral was not its buildings but its ability to let go. The city that began with music ended in silence, and somehow that silence has outlasted every empire that came after. When the last fires of Caral flickered out, the valley did not mourn. It simply exhaled, drawing a long breath of wind across the terraces, and began the slow work of forgetting. There were no cries, no collapsing towers, no smoke rising to mark an ending. Only the steady hush of sand shifting over stone. In that stillness, 1,000 years of human effort began to dissolve grain by grain, carried away by the same air that had once cooled the builders' hands. The people had left quietly. Perhaps a few families lingered, tending small gardens near the river, unwilling to abandon the bones of their ancestors. But the heart of the city, the great plazas, the pyramids, the fire pits where flutes once sang, fell silent. Wind moved through empty corridors, tracing the outlines of vanished lives. The same wind that once turned prayer into song now filled the plazas with dust. Over centuries the river wandered. It changed course, carving new paths through the valley and leaving the old ones to dry and crack. Each flood laid down a thin skin of silt. Each drought hardened it into clay. The pyramids, once glowing in the sun, grew pale. Rain rarely reached them, yet the sand did, endlessly, patiently. It crept up the stairways, buried the courtyards, softened the sharp corners of human design until the city resembled the hills around it. Nature has no haste. It reclaims gently, as if tucking away a child that has fallen asleep. The reeds returned first, sprouting in the abandoned canals, then the birds, nesting in crevices once carved by human hands. Lizards warmed themselves on the steps of temples. At night, the desert fox crossed the plaza where thousands had once danced. The city lived on, not as a ruin, but as part of the landscape, a pulse folded into the rhythm of wind and sand. Time blurred distinctions. The generations that came after remembered stories, not structures. They spoke of the people before stone, of ancestors who could call rain with music, who built cities that the gods themselves had forgotten. Their myths scattered along the coast like shells after a tide. Each told a little truth, but none remembered the name Caral. Centuries became millennia. The world changed. New cultures rose along the Andes, each believing itself the first. In the highlands, the Chavin carved temples from rock. On the plains, the Nazca drew lines that could only be seen from the sky. Later came the Moche, the Wari, the Inca, civilizations of gold and empire, each leaving marks that shone brighter and vanished faster. But beneath them all, in the bones of the earth, Caral slept. Wind and sand are patient archivists. They do not destroy, they conceal. Layer after layer, they wrap the city in silence, sealing away its plazas like pages in a closed book. When rain occasionally fell, it did not wash the stones away. It pressed them deeper, protecting what lay beneath. By the time the Spanish ships appeared on the horizon, thousands of years later, Caral was already ancient beyond imagination, a ghost of a ghost. The conquerors who came to Peru found the Inca, and through them, glimpses of something older. They asked the locals who had built the strange mounds that dotted the valleys. No one could say. The answers dissolved like smoke. They were made by the first ones, by those who came before. And so Caral remained invisible, present, but unseen. For centuries, travellers passed through the Soup Valley without noticing. The dunes rolled gently, hiding what was beneath. Farmers grazed their animals near the mounds, unaware that they walked atop the oldest city of the continent. Even when archaeologists explored Peru's coast in the 19th century, they overlooked it. The ruins seemed too humble, too quiet to be important. Civilization, they believed, required grandeur, sculptures, gold, written words. Caral offered only dust and silence. But the desert has its own language, spoken slowly, patiently. When the wind changes direction, it uncovers fragments of memory, a shard of pottery, a piece of woven cotton, a wall emerging like bone from the sand. Each clue is a whisper, I am still here. At the turn of the 20th century, scholars began to notice patterns among the coastal ruins. They found remnants of ancient canals, traces of pyramids hidden beneath dunes. Yet even then, few suspected their true age. It was not until the late 1990s, when Ruth Shady Solis walked the Super Valley, that Caral finally began to speak again. She saw what others had not. Where most saw mounds of rock, she saw symmetry, geometry too precise to be random. The stones were placed deliberately, the alignments purposeful. She felt the echo of human intent. Her team began to excavate, brushing away centuries of sand, one thin layer at a time. What emerged was astonishing. Stairways intact, walls unbroken, plazas perfectly circular, as if time itself had paused in reverence. Each discovery deepened the silence rather than breaking it. The archaeologists spoke softly, aware they were walking through the oldest architecture in the Western Hemisphere. They found no weapons, no bones of battle, only instruments of art and faith. Beneath the sand lay not a fortress, but a message that the first great city of the Americas had been built for peace. When they uncovered the Great Pyramid, its steps still faced the sunrise. Morning light fell exactly as it must have 5,000 years earlier. For a moment, time folded. The wind rose from the ocean and swept across the valley, lifting dust from the stones, like the breath of something waking. It was as though Caral recognized the return of human eyes. Ruth Shady once described her feeling standing atop the ruins at dusk. The city was asleep and we had whispered its name. That name, Caral, had waited for millennia to be spoken again. The more they uncovered, the clearer the story became. This was no minor settlement. The pyramids spread across 60 hectares. 6 great platforms dominated the centre. Dozens of smaller mounds surrounded them. The layout revealed a plan too sophisticated to be coincidence. At the core of each structure were stones packed inside woven bags, an ancient engineering marvel that allowed the buildings to survive earthquakes. What time had buried, ingenuity had preserved. The desert, it seemed, had been both destroyer and protector. Its silence had hidden Caral from invaders, treasure hunters, and weather. Its dryness had mummified even the smallest fragments, seeds, fish bones, the imprint of ropes in clay. Every detail waited patiently beneath the sand, as if the earth itself had chosen to guard the memory of peace until the world was ready to understand it again. By 2001, the site was declared the cradle of Andean civilization. In 2009, UNESCO named it a World Heritage Site. And once more, the wind returned, now carrying not dust but voices. Visitors began to walk where builders once stood. Footsteps echoed through the plazas. Cameras clicked where fires once burned. The valley, that had known only silence for 4,000 years, filled again with sound. Yet Caral remained calm. It did not awaken in haste. Its stones, long accustomed to solitude, seemed to absorb the noise, turning it soft. Even today, when tourists come, the air feels meditative. You cannot shout here. The landscape itself hushes you. Every breath feels like a conversation with time. The sand still moves. It rises and falls with the wind, covering what the excavators reveal, as if reminding them that discovery and concealment are part of the same dance. No matter how much is uncovered, Caral will never be entirely revealed, and perhaps it should not be. Mystery is the final gift of the desert. When night falls, the valley glows faintly under the moon. The outlines of the pyramids catch the light, casting long shadows across the dunes. It is easy to imagine that somewhere beneath the surface, the last embers of those ancient fires still glow. The air is cool, the stars sharp, and if you listen long enough, you might hear the faint whistle of wind through the buried stairways, sounding almost like a flute. That sound is not a haunting, it is a memory, a whisper from a civilization that refused to vanish entirely. The sand can hide, but it cannot silence. What Caral built was not meant for eternity, it was meant for continuity, for return. And in being forgotten, it found its way to immortality. History tends to remember the loud, the conquerors, the empires, the kings. But the earth remembers differently. It remembers through endurance, through stillness. It keeps safe what deserves peace. Caral's survival beneath the sand is not an accident. It is an act of balance. A civilization born without war was granted a death without ruin. Tonight, as the desert wind crosses the Soup Valley, it still stirs the dust of their world. Each gust reveals a stone, a wall, a trace of human hands. Each grain carries both forgetting and remembrance. Somewhere between them lies the true legacy of Caral. Not the city itself, but the silence that protects it. The sand does not bury to destroy, it buries to preserve. It covers what the world is not yet ready to see, then lifts it again when the time is right, and so Caral sleeps lightly, never truly gone, its breath mingling with the wind, its heart still beating beneath the surface of time. For 4,000 years, the Supi Valley slept beneath a veil of dust. Wind erased footsteps, rivers changed their course, and the memory of a city built before time itself drifted into legend. But memory, even when buried, has weight. It presses upward through the soil, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. In 1994, a Peruvian archaeologist named Ruth Shady walked into the valley for the first time. She was accustomed to silence. Years of fieldwork had taught her that the earth rarely reveals its secrets to those who arrive in haste. The sun hung low over the hills that day, casting shadows across the mounds of stone. To most eyes, they were nothing, just heaps of rubble, pale and lifeless. But to her, something felt different. The lines were too straight, the angles too deliberate. The wind that whispered through the valley carried a strange echo, as if the land itself were holding its breath. She set up camp with a small team of students and workers, no funding, no public attention, just a sense of curiosity, strong enough to fight the desert's loneliness. By day, they surveyed the valley under blinding light. By night, they sat beside small fires and talked about what might lie beneath. Each morning brought the same wind that had blown since Caral's beginning, and with it, a feeling that they were being watched not by people, but by time. When the first excavation began, the work was painstaking. Every handful of sand was lifted as if it contained a heartbeat. After days of digging, a corner of stone appeared, then a stairway, then another. Ruth knelt in the dust, brushing away the centuries with her fingertips. Beneath the layers of earth, she found a perfectly cut platform, its edges aligned to the cardinal directions. It was not random, it was intentional, mathematical, human. She realised then that she was standing on something immense. The mounds were not natural hills, they were pyramids. Their foundations reached deep into the earth, their construction older than any known temple in Peru. Ruth Shady looked out over the valley, the wind whipping her hair, and said quietly to her team, "This is not a village, this is a city." In the months that followed, the city rose again, not from construction, but from memory. Walls emerged where there had been sand, plazas appeared, curved and precise. As the sun moved across the sky, its light slid over the newly exposed stones, revealing patterns of shadow that had not been seen in 5 millennia. At first, few believed her claim. Scholars accustomed to thinking of the Old World as the cradle of civilization found it hard to accept that the New World had its own dawn. How could a city in South America be as old as Egypt? How could it exist without pottery, metal, or warfare? But Ruth Shady was certain. She knew what the stones were saying. They spoke of architecture, mathematics, social order, and faith. They spoke of a civilization that had risen and fallen long before history began to count. For years, she worked with limited resources, often funding the project herself. The desert was unforgiving. Supplies ran out, equipment broke. There were days when the wind covered what they had just uncovered, but she stayed. Each evening, as the sun set and the valley turned gold, she would walk alone among the mounds. She listened to the same wind that once carried music, and in its breath, she heard encouragement. By 1997, her findings were impossible to ignore. Carbon dating confirmed what intuition had already told her. The structures of Caral were nearly 5,000 years old, older than the pyramids of Giza, older than Stonehenge. A city born not from conflict, but from cooperation, the oldest known civilization in the Americas. The scientific world reacted slowly. Some dismissed her as overstating the evidence. Others questioned the significance of a city without gold or warriors. But gradually, the data spoke for itself. Peer-reviewed studies, satellite imaging, and further excavations confirmed the truth. Caral was real, and it was ancient. News spread throughout Peru. For the first time, a civilization on the South American coast rivaled the antiquity of the Old World. Schools taught its story. Pilgrims of curiosity came to see the valley where time had paused. And Ruth Shady stood among them, quiet and tired. Watching the city, she had awakened breathe again. Excavation is a form of listening. Each stone is a syllable, each artifact a word. When arranged together, they form sentences written by centuries. As her team continued their work, a narrative emerged not of war or power, but of connection. They found traces of fish from the coast and fruit from the highlands, proof of trade and trust. They found flutes, reed baskets, and ritual fires. They found peace preserved in ash, in architecture, in silence. In 2009, the United Nations declared Caral a World Heritage Site. For Ruth Shady, it was not a moment of triumph, but of completion. She once said, "The people of Caral left no weapons because their power was spiritual. They knew how to build society without war." Her words carried the same quiet reverence as the city itself. Today, Caral is a pilgrimage of a different kind. Scholars, tourists, and locals walk its paths not to worship gods, but to witness humanity's oldest lesson, that cooperation can outlast violence. The air there feels different. Perhaps it is the thinness of the desert, or perhaps it is memory itself hanging in the wind. When you stand on the Great Pyramid at sunrise, you see the river shining like a silver vein through the valley. The light moves across the stones, touching each corner with warmth. Somewhere in that moment, you understand what Ruth Shady felt on her first day here, that this place is not a relic, but a mirror. It reflects what humanity can be when it remembers how to listen. The wind still speaks through the ruins, carrying the same tones that once filled the valley. At times it sounds like music, at times like breathing. Every gust seems to pause as it passes through the circular plaza, as if acknowledging the hands that built it. The city feels alive again, not reborn, but remembered. Ruth Shady is often called the mother of Caral, but she prefers to say she was only its messenger. "I did not discover Caral," she once said. "It revealed itself when the world was ready to hear." Perhaps she's right. The lessons of Caral, balance, peace, respect for the earth, are not new. They are ancient, forgotten, and needed again. At night, the archaeological camp is quiet. The same moon that watched over the ancient builders now shines on their students. Dust glitters in the pale light, and the pyramids cast shadows like frozen waves. Ruth sometimes walks alone to the edge of the plaza. She places her hand on the stone and listens. The wind moves through the valley, soft and endless. Somewhere within it, the city still breathes. In her journals, she once wrote, "Caral was never lost. It was waiting for the right kind of eyes that see without conquest." Those words linger, carved not in stone but in the minds of those who come after. Every archaeologist who arrives here now feels it. A gentle pressure, a hum beneath the sand, as if the earth itself is still telling its story. There is a poetic justice in the fact that the oldest city in the Americas was brought back to light by a woman whose strength was patience, not power. The same qualities that once built Caral care, balance, collaboration, are the ones that revived it. Through her hands the circle closed. As the sun sets behind the Andes, the valley glows amber. The wind rises, carrying dust and light together. The pyramids stand quiet, unchanged, their steps facing eternity. Caral has waited 5,000 years to be remembered, and now that it has, it does not speak loudly. It simply exists again, as it always did, a city of wind, fire and peace. If you ever stand there in the cool hours before dawn, listen closely. The air is thin and filled with echoes. You might hear the soft brush of sand against stone, the beat of your own pulse, matching the heartbeat of the valley. And for a moment, you'll understand why Ruth Shady called it the city before time, because even time itself bows to its silence. There are places in the world where silence feels alive, where every gust of wind carries the weight of what once was. Caral is one of those places. It does not speak in words, it speaks in breath. Stand at the centre of its great circular plaza just before sunrise. The desert is still, the air cool, the stars fading in the east. The pyramids around you rise like sleeping giants, their edges softened by centuries of sand. For a moment, the whole valley holds its breath waiting. Then, as the first light spills over the horizon, the stones seem to glow from within. The wind moves again, slow and steady, tracing invisible paths between stairways and walls. And if you listen closely, it sounds almost like the inhale and exhale of the earth itself. This is the breath of the first city, the rhythm that began 5,000 years ago and has never truly stopped. Every civilization has a pulse. For Caral, it was the harmony between people and the land that sustained them. Even now, that rhythm persists. The river still glimmers, winding its way to the sea. The wind still hums through corridors that once echoed with music. The sun still climbs the same sky the builders once watched with reverence. Time has passed, but the pattern remains. Archaeologists measure their discoveries in layers and centuries, but when you stand in Caral, those measurements blur. Here you feel time as a circle endless, returning gentle. It begins not in the past, but in the present moment, in the stillness, in the breath you share with the valley. Ruth Shady often says that Caral's legacy is not its age, but its message. It reminds us that the roots of civilization do not have to grow from war. They can grow from balance, from music, from understanding. It is a lesson as old as the stones and as new as the dawn. Look closely at the pyramids. They are not tall like Egypt's, not gilded or carved with gods. They are humble, sloping gently into the earth, as if refusing to dominate it. Each layer of stone was placed by hand, each step meant to rise only as high as necessary. The builders did not seek to touch the heavens. They sought to honour the ground. It is architecture born from respect, not ambition. Even the way the city breathes reflects that philosophy. When the wind moves through the valley, it enters one plaza, sweeps across another, and exits along the river, a perfect circulation. The city was designed to inhale and exhale with the planet. Its layout mirrors the flow of air, water, and light. It is less a monument than a living organism, one that continues to breathe long after its builders are gone. Modern visitors often describe an odd sensation when walking through Caral. They say the air feels different, lighter, as if charged. Some feel dizzy, others calm. Perhaps it is the heat, or perhaps it is memory itself pressing through the air. When you stand among these stones, you are standing inside the first collective dream of humanity on this side of the world. A dream of peace, of cooperation, of belonging. It hums softly beneath your feet. There is no gold here, no treasure to seek. The riches of Caral are invisible. The wind, the silence, the space between stones. In those spaces, something lingers, not ghosts, but gratitude. It is as if the city is thankful for its rediscovery, but unwilling to be disturbed. It wants to be seen, not claimed, remembered, not remade. At dusk, the valley changes again. The light softens to amber, shadows grow long. The pyramids seem to lean toward the setting sun as if bidding it farewell. The wind that has wandered all day through the desert settles, wrapping the ruins in stillness. You can almost imagine the people of Caral lighting their fires as they once did, preparing for another night of song. Their flutes are gone, their voices lost, but the rhythm remains in the wind's whisper. Each evening, the earth cools and the air begins its ancient cycle. Warm air rises from the dunes, cool air descends from the mountains. The valley breathes again. You can feel it in your chest, that same rise and fall, that same pulse of creation. The connection between body and world becomes impossible to ignore. For a moment you understand what the builders understood, that to live in balance is to breathe with the land, not against it. The story of Caral is not one of perfection. It knew drought, hunger and loss. Its people watched their river falter, their harvests fail. But they faced those trials without turning to war. Their answer was always cooperation to share, to rebuild, to adapt. And when the end came, they left gently, leaving the city intact. Even in absence, they showed respect. That perhaps is Caral's most powerful breath, its final exhale, which carried not fear but acceptance. Few civilizations have ended so quietly. Fewer still have left behind a silence so alive. In the modern world, we often equate silence with emptiness, but in Caral, silence is presence. It fills the air like incense, soft and unbroken. It is the sound of endurance. The city teaches us that peace does not need to shout to be heard. It simply needs to keep breathing. There is a story Ruth, Shady tells her students when they arrive at the site for the first time. She says, "Before you touch the stones, stop and breathe, because the city is breathing too, and you must match its rhythm to understand it." They stand together in the heat, eyes closed, listening, and slowly they begin to hear what she means: the wind brushing through reeds, the soft crackle of sand against stone, the faint thrum of the earth beneath their feet. It is not a sound that can be recorded, it can only be felt. Caral is proof that humanity once knew how to listen. It listened to the river's patience, to the wind's direction, to the quiet advice of the stars. In return, the land listened back. Together they created something that has lasted 5,000 years, not in glory, but in grace. As the night deepens, stars bloom above the valley. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon, a river of light mirroring the river below. In the darkness, the outlines of the pyramids merge with the hills, becoming part of the landscape once more. Only the faintest glow remains a memory of fire, a reflection of time. Somewhere far away, the Pacific breathes against the shore. The same tide that fed Caral's fishermen still moves, pulled by the same moon. It carries whispers of the first city across the centuries, folding them into the rhythm of waves. And so, even as the world changes, the breath of Caral continues in the wind, in the sea, in us. For we too are descendants of that rhythm. Every heartbeat echoes the drum of ancient festivals. Every inhalation repeats the valley's sigh. Civilizations rise and fall, but the breath remains. It connects the living to the forgotten, the present to the timeless. At dawn, when the first rays strike the stones again, the valley wakes. The air warms, the wind stirs, and the desert hums softly, as if greeting another day. Nothing moves quickly here. Even the light seems to take its time. It stretches gently across the terraces, illuminating the steps one by one. For a brief instant, Caral looks as it must have in its youth, golden, patient, eternal. Then the wind rises again. It moves between the stones, over the dunes, through the reeds, into the sea. It carries with it the breath of the first city unchanged, undiminished. It carries the memory of those who built without war, who lived without conquest, who believed that harmony was stronger than power. And as the day begins, the valley breathes once more slowly, endlessly, beautifully. The same rhythm that began 5,000 years ago continues, whispering through the sand. We were here, we listened, we built peace, and still we breathe. And so, our journey through the Valley of Caral comes to an end. From the whisper of its winds to the slow heartbeat of its stones, we have walked through the first breath of civilization in the Americas, a place where humanity learned to build not for war, but for harmony. 5,000 years ago, long before empires drew their borders, before kings carved their names into stone, the people of this valley built a world sustained by peace. They raised pyramids not to conquer the sky, but to balance it. They made music not to praise victory, but to honour the rhythm of the earth. And when the time came to leave, they left gently, trusting the sand to guard what they had made. Centuries passed, the river changed course, the dunes shifted, and the city sank into silence. But silence, in Caral, is not an absence. It is a form of remembrance, a language older than words. Every gust of wind that crosses this valley carries the memory of those who once listened, once built, once believed. Today, the ruins remain pale under the sun, quiet under the stars. If you walk among them, you feel not loneliness, but calm. The stones do not mourn their builders. They rest, content in their stillness. They have learned what we still struggle to understand, that to endure, one must sometimes disappear. The archaeologists who unearthed this city did not disturb its peace, they simply uncovered its breath. They brushed away the sand, and beneath it found the oldest reflection of ourselves, not the part driven by conquest or ambition, but the part that seeks connection, the part that knows how to live in rhythm with the world. Caral asks nothing of us except awareness, to pause, to listen, to remember that the first chapter of civilization was not written in battle, but in balance. It was not about dominion, but belonging. And it began right here, in this quiet valley, where wind and time still move together. As night returns, the air cools once more. The dunes stretch long shadows across the terraces. Far away, the Pacific murmurs in the dark. The same ocean that once fed the city's fishermen, the same tide that pulled at their songs. Above, the stars gather slow and patient, the way they have always done. Nothing has changed, not really. The earth still breathes, the city still dreams. If you close your eyes, you might hear it, the faint rhythm of flutes carried on the wind, the soft crackle of fire, the murmur of voices long gone. It is not imagination, it is memory, woven into the air. For Caral was never truly lost, it only waited for someone to listen again. So as you rest now, let the breath of this ancient city follow you into sleep. Let the rhythm of the wind become your rhythm. Let the silence that remains remind you that history too can be gentle. And when you wake, whether in this world or another, remember this. The first city was born, not from conquest, but from harmony. Its people walked with the earth, not above it. And their story, carried through the sands of time, still whispers one eternal truth, that peace is possible, and it has always been. Thank you for listening. I wish you a peaceful, restful night, and I look forward to seeing you again on our next journey through history.